Now we're at an episode that's making my shortlist of the top programs within the Futurama Classic 4 season run. A Pharaoh to Remember is, as I suggested in a previous upload, is possibly, along with two other particular titles, the Bender episode. And it's a fascinating instance of, the show just a full tour de force script about Bender wanting to be remembered after he, potentially leaves this world. And so he, upon their arrival on this planet whose culture is inspired by, didn't influence our ancient Egyptians, was rather inspired by the ancient Egypt of Earth's past, and it defined how their culture is enacted.
Insane Theories 1.
And then, so Bender becomes really enamored with the egos, the brutal, cruel legacies that these pharaohs leave behind on this planet, and he wants he idolizes them. He wants to be loved and to do good by them. And of course, upon Pharaoh from Menfetep's passing, he decides he wants to become the new pharaoh, and so he manipulates this society into becoming their new overlord, and he wants to build a statue to himself similar to the other pharaohs, deceased pharaohs' monuments, but he wants it to be bigger, larger, more intimidating than all of theirs, and so that he shall be remembered forever, at least on this particular planet, Osiris 4. And it's the most Bender premise of all time in a way. And you know what, I really just, I guess I hope I'm not jumping too far ahead, but I love that, I guess a bit like with Hella's other robots, they don't bother to deliver they don't bother going full circle, and Bender doesn't really learn anything. He decides that even though the statue's destroyed, the planet will at least remember him by how cruel and malignant he was, and so he resolves that he's going to go after his dream of conquering / destroying all humans on Earth after all.
That's true. They do that with Bender episodes, because they also do that with Fear of a Bot Planet.
Yeah.
Where Bender doesn't learn his lesson, because that ends with the photo of him being glassing Fry or whatever.
That's classic.
Yeah, they do that, and that is sort of the genius of Futurama Bender episodes, is, like, I guess to the audience they sort of do spell out a moral, but for the characters themselves, Bender, once again, part of his character is like to sort of almost unconsciously overlook that as well. So it does fit in very well, and is funny every time.
And it's a robot. Like, why would he learn anything from it? He's just fulfilling a certain coding.
Well, one thing I did notice about this episode that I hadn't really before is just to the degree, which maybe would separate it from other Bender episodes, like the degree throughout the episode of how heavily he's like emoting feels a bit of out of place for Bender, especially for like emotes that aren't like anger. I guess, when he's reading that magazine, it's like sullen robot or whatever. And so the sort of sullen Bender thing to me feels a bit like a carryover from, like, does he still have that emotional chip or whatever?
I second that emotion.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Because I never really noticed that, but I felt that a few times in this episode. It's sort of, that Bender carries over in a few scenes. Though obviously there's plenty of him in the sort of, his whole interactions with the slaves and stuff like that is all that classic Bender. But, like, Bender, I guess, does occasionally get sort of hyper-emotional, but this episode seems to be a bit of an outlier in that sense.
I mean, it'd be emotional. Like, he'd have his, love interests, and he'd have his, sort of...
I guess I mean...
sort of despairing moments, and, I remember he was sad when Fry was going to leave them in the Deep South, if you remember. He was fairly... genuinely upset there.
That's true. Whereas he's completely the opposite when Fry's sentimental in the funeral thing, though that does make a lot of sense. That's a great scene. That's like one of the classics of the show.
Yeah.
But even something like in the, Titanic episode, he is being emotional there, but then the second he finds out that it's fake, it sort of wears off a bit,
Yeah, but then again, that's one of those instances of Bender never really learning. But, he's capable of these emotions, but, and even, his sort of loyalty, his sadness at the Pharaoh's death is immediately, and, sort of reverence for the culture is immediately replaced with, screw these idiots, I'm going to, show them up, I'm going to use their sort of belief system against them, and he, he sort of just starts lording over society. He was, sort of, had a sort of adulation for it, and he's, disrespecting the legacy of that Pharaoh by building an even bigger monument, after having, just crying.
This episode is probably one of the best premises of the show, far and away.
Yeah.
It's a classic.
And just it's an intensely funny script, as I stated earlier, I assume. It's just I think it's one of the best exercises in, and Bender's a brilliant conduit for the excesses of human ego, because you could a human character you could never feasibly write a human character as having doing this. I mean, you could, and it would just be over the top. It would just be like, it'd be horrible. You know what I mean?
It's a lot
It'd just be
funnier
like
that it's
kind of
coming from
snarky. Like if Rick was doing this on Rick and Morty, it'd be just like kind of snarkily. Like you can just imagine the writers sort of like getting themselves off on being just nasty and unpleasant, and the viewers sort of sadistically laughing at how unpleasant their fucking mums might find it. You know what I mean? There's nothing clever or interesting about it. Whereas Bender, like you can, it's actually a really sort of fluid and tasteful conduit for the excesses of human behavior, for behavior that would just be unfeasible. Like for the robot to be doing this, we don't, or Bender specifically doing it, we don't question this whatsoever.
Yeah,
and so
it fits in very well.
Yeah, just
and from like episode 1 as well.
Oh yeah, and I just always loved the question posed of Bender's sort of brief melancholy / disappointment. It's a great statue, but they're going to remember me or the statue.
Yeah,
like that's a fantastic line
for sure.
to pose to anyone who's thinking about sort of their legacy and why they're doing what they're doing in life. You know, questioning whether their ego is motivating them or not. You know, you can. If someone thinks they're so grand, they want to build a statue of themselves. I want everyone to remember me, and then generations from now, people will be just passing this statue, or they'll know it's a statue, and then one day they might ask, "Who was that guy?" And someone will say, "Oh yeah." Oh, okay. And then maybe 5 years will pass and you'll think of the statue again and someone else will point it out and they'll be like, who is this guy? And you'll be like, oh, someone told me once, but I don't remember.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happens. You see statues up around in Sydney all the time. People know the statues. They don't know who's the governor of some locality in like over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
No one knows.
There's
who
a bunch
cares.
of bronze heads of like
no disrespect
Portuguese
guys,
sailors outside Central Station.
Who gives a stuff?
No one knows who they are.
Yeah.
Of course. And yeah, even when I used to watch this episode as a kid, especially the first time I saw it, when that plot shift happens, when that line happens, and suddenly it's also a tonal shift where their society just decides to, oh fuck him.
That's hilarious. The Pharaoh suddenly dies.
Throws him in there. Like, even when I was a little kid, I thought that was really clever. Like the way the plot, that line essentially, you know, Bender just says, tear it down, you know, because they're going to remember the statue, not me.
Yeah.
Because it is a very vivid sort of, like, basic philosophical point, but very, like, that's what I mean by, like, even when I was a kid, it was able to, it's a sentiment that can cut through very generally to nearly anyone, you know?
Well, it's like one of those great biblical or otherwise ancient fables from antiquity where they would tell a story about Nebuchadnezzar or one of these kings, and even though we're far removed from that time, like, they would tell us, so you can imagine them telling it to kids even in the 20th century beyond, say, oh, ancient King Nebuchadnezzar, it's a story in the Old Testament, say, you know, in the Babylon, and he did this and this, and then they remembered the statue, but they forgot his name. And then the sands pass and blah, 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 blah. And like, but they put it in this Futurama context, and it's absolutely glorious of characters we know and love, and just this sort of our sort of bending everyman delivery robot winding up as the Pharaoh of Osiris IV, and Fry and Leela being caught up with it, and then sort of being like, not just annoyed at the being slaves, you know, from the second Pharaoh's tenure and that another Pharaoh's tenure, but also just frustrated how like Bender's ego is just getting out of control. Like to them, it's twofold. It's this cruel dictator, but it's also like, you know, their friend just like unchecked, and his worst traits coming to...
Yeah, like Leela straight away goes, oh... Bro.
Yeah. It's just beautiful. Like, she knows exactly what they're...
What's going to happen, and I love that...
Bender's traits manifesting to their ugliest degrees.
This episode, is it the first appearance of the Crocodile Dundee slave guy?
No, he was in Homie's Requisition, his group.
Yeah,
I think this is his second appearance.
They always bring him back for slave labor roles.
I have no idea.
That's like a deep cast character
yeah.
of Futurama, I suppose.
It's so funny. And yeah, I just... another thing I want to point out is I just love the ancient Egyptian motif. I think it's fascinating how a couple of sci-fi shows have decided to employ these sort of ancient Egypt, sort of all these popular Egyptology ideas and sort of the surface level sheen and aesthetic to compose these fascinating scaffolds for science fiction exercises. Obviously, I'm referring to given AOD's tendencies, the classic, well, I guess two instances in Doctor Who, I guess initially the more aping off of the Victorian era, sort of like, you know, the Hammer or Universal before that, especially because the episode series of black and white, the Mummy sort of horror pictures, you know, Tomb of the Cybermen from the 60s is very much that. But you also had, of course, the best example of it, the most well-known, 1976's Pyramids of Mars, one of my favorite moments in the entire program. Beautifully realized production, but just employing these ancient Egyptian art design and then sort of implying, I guess, the opposite of this episode, that our ancient Egyptians were inspired by this extraterrestrial sort of deity of sorts, and Sutek, and then
Chariots of the gods.
Utilizing these as sort of our dressing for the sort of villains and sort of the technological devices in this episode. The pyramid is the shape of the sort of antagonistic laser device is in the pyramid, and his robot servants are kind of wrapped up in bandages like mummies, and of course he himself, Sutek, is like this strange missing link between ancient extraterrestrial depictions and what the Egyptian gods looked like in the sort of drawings by the ancient civilizations. Beautiful realization. It's such a potent little artistic continuum with which to sort of glaze your science fiction tropes in, and I think Futurama does it beautifully. I think obviously Who did it beautifully back then too.
80s pop culture.
I don't think Stargate did it very well though. 80s pop culture references the Bengals.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say one thing I guess I do like about this episode, because theoretically this episode shouldn't rub me the wrong way, and over the years it has at moments, but then I remember just how entertaining and clever it is. But the thing is that it's aping off that Egypt mania thing in a way, or at least the Bengals reference, or just that whole there's the English Egypt mania. But then I feel in the 80s, the Americans had a pop culture Pepsi version,
something like
with
that,
Steve Martin doing King Tut.
Oh, that's silly shit.
Just something about Egypt aesthetics has always just kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
Okay.
I don't know why, but maybe it's just because that cheesy crap,
Yeah.
So this episode is good at sort of transcending that, I suppose,
Yeah.
Another good thing from the 80s that's good at that is the Cairo sequence in
Raiders All-Star.
Yeah, in Raiders. Because that's just gritty. That doesn't have any of that 80s Pepsi Egypt shit.
Well, yeah, set in the 40s, I suppose, or 30s, I guess. This is and that.
But I swear that's a phenomenon. The 80s are just obsessed with this kitschy Egypt thing.
I think so. I'm trying to think of is there any examples of media Egypt 80s?
Power Slave.
Oh, that's a good that's an interesting example actually. There you go. That's nice. I like it.
They're out there. You'd have to think, because obviously I haven't thought about it too deeply, but
because every now and then I'm thinking of a certain horror film comes to mind. No, that's from the 70s. It's from the UK. It's a bit different. And the UK, when they do sort of a period thing, the Victorian era, they're shipping all this stuff from Egypt over. So you get stuff I think it's the second Dr. Phoebes film. There's a bit of a theme of that. And obviously the Hammer mummy films, and there's a couple other things.
Yeah, well, Hammer are mostly English, right?
Well, they're
all English, yeah.
No, there are a couple of films set in America.
Because even, to be fair, I've never been a huge fan of the British, Egypt mania either. It's, safari suits, shorts with long socks.
I kind of
let's go raid the tomb.
I enjoy it in my own way.
Yeah, I can see where people would appreciate the sort of kitschiness of it. It's kind of neat, but...
Well, I like monsters and just, sort of genre fiction. So, insofar as it lends itself to that, it can be inspiring material like that a bit later.
And, of course, this episode has that Abbott and Costello reference, which
is... Also Wolfman. So, the sirens are inspired by the ancient Egyptians, and maybe a later version of the age. Maybe Earth Society in Futurama tends to go back to previous periods. Maybe Egypt becomes its ancient self again, and they incorporate the Universal Studios films mythos into their, I don't know, Abbott and Costello.
Yeah, they should do that in the new season. Do a sequel Egypt episode. They have brought the Osirans back, though, haven't they?
Not in a major capacity.
No, not in a major capacity. But you see the Ibis people again at some point.
Yeah.
Maybe
actually, those Ibis people are some of the coolest alien designs.
I always love those.
Those are fantastic.
The anthropomorphic Ibises are great.
Yeah, that's amazing. And the dogs are terrific, of course.
Yeah. The bit where Bender throws the ball. That's another little clever gag. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think this is one of the triumphant episodes of the show, using a science fiction premise to do the ultimate sort of character study of human pathology, but of course, which is already a science fiction device since it's a robot, meaning trying to emulate a human pathology, and it's just the perfect sort of hilarious distillation of human egocentric excesses, and I think it's a masterpiece of sitcom writing, more or less. Yeah,
Yeah.
television writing. Fuck sitcom.
It's one of the best Bender episodes easily. I do have like my own sort of short list of Bender episodes, which I'd put a few others higher, like the one you mentioned a few days ago, like Absolutely Fabulous. Yeah, that's hard to top.
Obviously, we talk about Hell is Other Robots.
Hell is Other Robots. But this one.
There's one coming up as well, which is arguably the best in the entire show.
Well,
really.
That's not even a Bender episode. That's just more of a general thing where Bender's the conduit.
Yeah,
for it.
I suppose it's fair to say. Yeah,
that episode's one of the I would put it at the top of a short list for sure.
There's one coming up, and there's another one in season 4 too. Actually, when he's on television, which is
that's classic. Yeah,
fantastic.
But that's just Bender at his like cathartic best.
But also making a semi-decent point about how these characters are sort of, the depictions on television versus, how the kids are supposed to receive them, and the sort of, obviously we'll get to it when that episode comes up. How kids receiving characters and how the characters portrayed, and people sort of assuming one was, the fact that there's this end result means that it was intended in the television writers, or the creators of the show, but this is a far-fetched scenario a lot of the time. But interestingly, ironically enough, not in that episode. That's why the episode kind of tries to make a point of it, because Bender is trying to influence the kids negatively, but even he's just like, they shouldn't be watching it. You guys, you should know better. Why are you letting them watch TV unsupervised?
He assumes that there's a rung above him that'll be responsible for him.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. Anyway, we'll get to that episode when
that's a great episode too. But yeah, this is another one. It is in that short list of best Bender episodes easily.
Or it was just episodes of the show.
It's a good one.
Yeah, one of the best executions of the show's capacities around. They nailed it here. I'll stand by that here.
Yeah. It's and standout of the season too, for a good season.
Definitely. Yeah, great stuff here. All right, I guess shared everything I would like to, at least.
Me too.
That's interesting.
What's the next
one? The next one is, just out of curiosity, I think I know what it is, but I just want to double check. I know what it is for certain. Sorry, everyone. It's okay. Next time, everyone, it'll be Anthology of Interest 2.
Oh, nice. The hits just keep rolling.
Stay tuned for that if you're so inclined. Thanks again.